This is Joyce Hanson. Today is September 13th, 2007. This is an interview with Mr. David Haas for the Murrieta Oral History Project.
All right, Mr. Haas, how long did you live in Murrieta?
Well, I moved there in 1984.
Okay.
And I stayed there for, I don't know, 20 years or so.
Okay. What was your occupation while you were there?
I'm a general contractor.
Okay. How did you get involved in politics in Murrieta?
Well, I joined the Chamber of Commerce, and at that time the county regarded the Chamber as an agency of the area, and if somebody wanted to do something there, they would always send them to us to review their plans and their projects. I became the president of the Chamber of Commerce, and then Carmela Loelkes was asked to be on a committee from the county to do the Southwest Area Plan. And she asked if there was anybody in the chamber that wanted to participate in that, and I agreed to do so. Having some background, I was in civil engineering and what have you. So I agreed to do that, and we started in on working on it. I asked the county for a traffic study, and they said mind my own business and do it according to their instructions. So anyway, that put a sour taste in my mouth. But we worked on it, and we chose the site where the Civic Center is right now. We chose that at that time on the Southwest Area Plan. But we were told we couldn't do that by the county because we weren't incorporated. So when I explained to some people there that it wasn't a matter of if we incorporated, but when we incorporated. So it got just one thing led to another, and there was a committee that finally got together after Temecula, which was going to incorporate, but Peter Bedford wanted to take in the whole area when they asked him to finance it, the feasibility study. So we didn't want to be part of Temecula or at that time Rancho California. So we got together, and there was 35 people wanted to be on the committee, and so I said, well, as far as I'm concerned, that's too many people, so I wouldn't be a part of it. Until later on, the committee asked each board member to put in $1,000 to start the feasibility study of incorporation of ourselves. Am I going too fast?
No, you're doing just fine.
Okay. So then I was asked to attend some of those meetings, and I did. And we started to get a man by the name of Christensen to do the feasibility study for incorporation for ourselves. But we needed to raise some money, and the committee decided that, well, they would probably just put up the money to do so. But I encouraged them to get the public involved by fundraisers and what have you, because we were going to need the public to vote on this. So the more people we could get involved and working for us for the incorporation, the better off we would be. Mm-hmm. So we started some fundraisers. I started off with a steak fry at the Pegasus Stock Farm, which was next to my property. And we had over 400 people show up for dinner.
Wow.
So anyway, I paid for all the food, and we put this thing on, and I think we raised about $8,000 that night towards the incorporation. And then course, that wasn't anywhere near enough, so I did my wife and I, and my daughter-in-law and my mother, we put on a Oktoberfest at the town hall for another fundraiser. And we cooked and supplied all the food for that. And we had another 400 people show up for that one. So we were getting the community involved, and then we had an auction. People donated things for an auction, and cars and horses and plants and whatever. So we raised, I don't know, $20,000 around that time.
That's a good amount of money.
So, all total, I think, with my donation and what have you, it was somewhere around $25,000. So we went ahead with it and we had our meetings and we had our feasibility study started, and the LAFCO told us not to use a main highway would be a good boundary for our city. Not to use grant lines, not to use riverbeds, not to use other areas that weren't really defined. So we started out in 1884. Murrieta, actually, the boundaries of Murrieta went down into what is now Temecula, right through the Adobe Plaza. And so we used that as a boundary, and then they made us pull it back. So we pulled it back to Winchester, and they, of course, Bedford didn't like that. He fought that. And so LAFCO pulled us back to Cherry Street. And they also pulled us back to that creek bed over by the hot springs. And then they pulled us back from Clinton Keith, which was another boundary that we chose. They pulled us back to the Grant Line, and then, of course, to the west was a Grant Line. So everything LAFCO told us not to do, they did it to us.
I was going to say, that sounds contradictory, doesn't it?
So anyway, at that time, there was a German doctor trying to build a health hotel over where the old Temecula Hot Springs was. And so, of course, we wanted to use part of that as income to the city for incorporation. But it didn't happen, and when they pulled us back to that creek bed, the county thought that they had left that in the county, but they didn't. Well, Abraham was surprised when we told him that, well, we were glad that they left us our hotel. And so we did. So anyway, we tried to use that, but since it wasn't built, it wasn't even started yet, they wouldn't let us use that as part of our income.
Okay.
Because we had to show that we were going to be feasible to have enough income to run the city. So we left that out, and of course it never was built because the two Germanys got back together. They locked up all the funds, and then the son of the doctor was going to run this thing, and he got a divorce and decided he didn't want any part of it, so there it sat. So at that time we were also being talked to by the Donahue Shrivers group to build the Murrieta Springs Mall on what they called at that time the Golden Triangle. And so I decided that I was going to run for city council because I had some ideas I thought would be well taken and useful to the city, because I was interested in which direction it would go. So that's one of the reasons why I ran for city council. I wasn't too happy with what the county was doing, because they were allowing projects to go forward without really taking into consideration the traffic problems that we were going to have.
Mm-hmm.
And so, unfortunately, a lot of those were already established before we became city.
Mm-hmm.
So I ran, and 5 of us, the first 5 was very congenial, and we worked very well together.
Mm-hmm. Hey, let me go back and ask you. You said it was part of the Golden Triangle. What was the Golden Triangle? Can you explain that to me?
That's the area, at that time, that was the area between the 15 and the 215 and Hot Springs Road.
Okay.
And, of course, the mall was never built,
Mm-hmm.
mainly because they were asking too much for the leases.
Mm-hmm.
And I told them at the time, I said, you know, I didn't think it would ever be built because of that.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, now they've extended that Golden Triangle to include that area north of Murrieta Hot Springs all the way up to Los Alamos.
Okay.
But at that time, it was only that portion, which is now owned by Domingoni's.
Okay. What were some of the positive things that came out of incorporation for the city?
Well, one of the positive things was the police department. We wanted our own police department. I met with Koisberg when we first started, and everybody in Temecula was saying, oh, you need to just contract with the county and blah, blah, blah. So I met with Kois, and so did a couple other councilmen, and we discussed the cost of the county being our police department, and he wanted $3.8 million. Just for patrol. Then there was going to be an additional amount for evidence, holding of evidence, dispatchers, detective work, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, you know, that's all fine and good, but we can't afford you because our first city budget was $5 million. So it left us nothing.
That's for sure.
So we had formed 28 committees, which we pared those down to 21 committees to do different studies, one for school, one for public safety, one for traffic, one for, well, just all different types of studies for the city. And the thing about it is, LAFCO gave us 8 months from the time that the vote was taken and we had won cityhood until the time we were official.
Mm-hmm.
They held us off for 8 months, which actually was a blessing because it gave us time to establish all the different departments that we needed. And my theory on it was that we needed to hit the ground running the minute that they said we were official.
Mm-hmm.
And because we had a lot of developers coming in, and they had plans to build, and so rather than waiting until we were city, then trying to build our different departments, they would put some of these developers behind at least 6 to 8 months.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't want that because we needed the revenues to run the city on.
Mm-hmm.
So we hired consultants for planning, engineering, excuse me, and so forth. But we hired a city manager who worked for the city for 3 months with no pay. And it was Jack Smith. And then he hired a secretary, and we were, well, for the first 8 months, we were paying for the telephone bill out of our pockets. City council was.
Mm.
Because we had no money.
Mm.
The state hadn't given us any, the county hadn't given us any of the money that we really had coming. In fact, we finally finally wound up having to sue them. They owed us $3 million, and I guess the city only got about $1.3 million out of it.
Wow.
In builder's fees. So anyway, we needed a city hall, and the temporary was Mrs. Hunt's house across the street. Well, there at the town hall. And we had an office in there for the city manager and his secretary. And then we needed a spot, and at that point, there really wasn't much in the way of availability of something in Murrieta that was large enough to handle what we needed. So I found this building where it's at now, where the city hall is now, and Rancon owned it. Dan Stevenson was the one that was going to negotiate the deal, and the city manager felt that we needed an interim or a in-between person to do the negotiation. He didn't think that we should negotiate directly with Rancon for that building. But it was actually the only thing big enough that would handle what we needed in the whole city. We looked at a house that was only 3,000 square feet. I said, it's not big enough. So we met with the negotiator, and I told him, I said, here's what I want you to tell Dan that we need. I said, first off, we want a 10-year lease with an option to buy at any one of those years. Because I figured it would take about 10 years in order to have enough money to go ahead and either buy that building or build another one someplace else. So I said also I want him to do the TIs, that's tenant improvements. And I want 6 months free rent. The guy said, you're nuts. I'm not going to go for that. I said, look, you just present that to Dan. Dan will go from there. So he came back in about 2 weeks and says, I can't believe this, but he went for it. So that we got, that was $10,000 a month rent after the TIs were done, and that was about $60,000 savings to the city. Plus, he did $300,000 worth of TIs, tenant improvements to the building.
Wow.
And we got the option to buy. So Dan really did the city a service by doing all of this. And the reason I wanted him to do the TIs was that if the city had done it, there would have been another 30% added on to what the costs were because of prevailing wages that the city would have to pay. So there was another probably $60,000 savings there. So from there we went and started our city.
So you had the police department. There were schools already there, right?
There was what?
There were schools already there in Murrieta before it incorporated. Is that right?
I still didn't understand you.
There were schools already in place?
Yes. Well, see, early on, before cityhood, I talked to some of the kids at school, and they didn't want to have to go to Elsinore for high school. So I was asked to be the chief petitioner for petitioning the community for the unification of our school district, which would give us a high school.
Okay.
And so we did that, but the city was growing so fast that the vandalism was just overwhelmed with the situation, because we went from a population of about 2,500 to 27,000 in 3 years.
Wow.
So the schools were really suffering. And so we got a bond passed for the high school after we got our unification. And we had a difficult time with that because we had to go to Riverside for interviews and everything else as to why we needed a high school in Murrieta. And at that time, they didn't think to them and convinced them that all the plans that were coming through the county and being presented to them, that we were going to be growing at a very rapid rate.
Mm-hmm.
And that I had interviewed a lot of the kids in junior high there at the one and only school we had was right there on Adams and Juniper. I said, when they get out of here, they don't want to go to Elsinore to high school.
Mm-hmm.
So we need our own. And as I remember, I think we were turned down the first time, but we didn't buy that. We went back.
Mm-hmm.
And the school board and myself and some others went back, and we finally convinced them that we needed our own high school. And, of course, the bond issue passed. It was a $38.5 million bond issue that passed,
Mm-hmm.
so that we could build our first high school.
Okay. What about fire protection?
We had our fire district. It was already established. A lot of it was, in fact, most of it was volunteer.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we incorporated, of course, we had a few paid at that point because of the fire district. The taxes to run the fire district was collected from residents.
Mm-hmm.
And then when LAFCO gave us the okay to be incorporated, they said that they wanted the fire district to match the city boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, the fire district, and I'm sure it's still a district, was brought back, and the boundaries were within the city limits. And we formed our police department. We went out and hired a police chief, and we told him how much money. We said, "You got $2.2 million to build a police department. Can you do it?"
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Yes." I said, "Okay, fine." But I wanted our police department to be tough on criminals, but kind to the citizens. If somebody had a flat tire and they came up and saw that a woman had a flat tire, help her fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And so they did.
Good.
The citizens was taking cookies and cakes and everything else to our police department when we first started it, because they were so happy. And
Yeah.
we took a poll in the city, and 85% of the residents wanted our own police department.
Yeah, I think that was a good idea.
Well, it was, and I had 7 different cities called, their city councilmen called us to ask us how we did it,
Mm-hmm.
because they were unhappy with their police protection from the county.
Mm-hmm.
When I first moved to Murrieta, we had 1 police officer for 320 square miles.
Oh.
And Joyce Bird, of course, was going to use Temecula, because they incorporated before we did. They were going to use their police department to police our city as well.
Mm.
So they weren't going to add anything. They were just going to get more revenue from us.
Gee.
I saw it.
Mm-hmm.
So we started our own with $2.2 million, and we financed the automobiles through the JPA and we got our insurance through JPA.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, it just, we put it together, and Jack Smith did a great job because he was our city manager, and he had was the first city manager for Cathedral City in the desert.
Mm.
So he had experience in putting cities together like that.
Mm-hmm.
So we started it and we did it. And when Fred and I was no longer on the council, I told him, I said, "Well, Fred, but what we did can never be undone."
That's true.
There it is. It's what it is today.
Mm-hmm.
Even though that I told him, I said, when we first started at our very first meeting, that we could do without being in violation of the Brown Act, I said, "You guys will be surprised what we can accomplish if you don't care who takes the credit. And that worked really well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's always a big issue of people trying to get credit for doing things.
Well, it's ego, and I said we don't need ego. What we need is cooperation among each other. If we need 3 votes to do anything, I said, and if we don't get the 3 votes, so be it. Just move on. Let's go on to the next project. We've got a lot to do here to establish a city.
Mm.
And we can't sit around and just dwell on our feelings if we don't get what we want.
Right.
So let's just run it that way.
Yeah.
And it worked well.
Okay. Let me ask you, we talked about some of the positive things. What were some of the negative things about incorporating and beginning a city?
Well, of course, I'm a positive person. I don't really dwell on negatives.
Mm-hmm.
But we had we had a couple of issues that were not well received by the public. Well, 3 of them actually. One was that I tried very hard to get a MRF. Waste Management wanted to put a waste transfer station in Murrieta. And I worked hard to get that because we had so many places where people, rather than going to the dump and paying a fee, were just dumping trash. And I said if they had a place close to go, and the waste transfer station is done all under roof. I mean, it would all be done inside a building.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, the state of California at that time had a mandate that we would do 25% of all trash would be recyclable, and by 95, 50% would be. So I was working very hard to get that accomplished, but there was a big hoopla about how there's going to be too many trucks on the road, there was going to be batteries dumped there, and the acid would get in the wells, and, just on and on and on.
Mm-hmm.
That really wasn't going to happen. Plus, we had them conditioned where they would help us politically and financially to put another on-ramp, off-ramp to the freeway at 15.
Mm-hmm.
Because Hot Springs Road was going to be impacted quite heavily, and at that time the mall was still underway to be built, and Winchester was already jammed up then.
Mm-hmm.
I said, and we're looking at 2,200 acres of industrial land here to be developed, which creates a lot of truck traffic and employees traffic. So we need another on-ramp, off-ramp. And I met with Caltrans and county and the feds and Temecula and Murrieta. We met to discuss another one. And I wanted another ramp, on-ramp, off-ramp done built at 8th Street. But Fed says, no, you can't do that. And I said, well, explain to me why it can't be done. They said, well, the regulation is that you have to have 1 mile in between on-ramps and off-ramps. I said, well, what's the closest? I said, Winchester. I said, well, how far is it? He says, 9/10 of a mile. I said, for 1/10 of a mile, you're going to hold our feet to the fire to keep us from having this other on-ramp, off-ramp? I said, all right, let's build that thing, and we'll go northbound with that one. We'll go up to Elm, build another one, and make it southbound. That way we got a southbound or a northbound less than a mile apart. Well, it never happened.
Yeah.
But we needed it, and it's still needed to this day.
Even more
For the
so.
traffic.
Even more so because the traffic is horrendous down there.
It's terrible. And that's why I tried to get all of the traffic studies done by the county before we incorporated when we did the swap plan. I said, you're not providing any streets. that are going to handle all the traffic that's going to be here.
Mm-hmm.
And we had the county road department to the chamber meeting. I asked for them to come down so we could ask them some questions. And when I brought up a lot of these, the guy handed me his card and says, "I'm just waiting to retire. Here, call my boss."
Oh.
I said, "Well, if this is the cooperation we're getting out of the county, we need to incorporate our city ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We could do these." And then, of course, the Road and Bridge Benefit District was a big issue.
Okay.
We met with the county, and Fred Weishaupt and I met with the county and their attorneys and everything else when this Road and Bridge Benefit District, they were going to put on us anyway. And so we met with them to try to get the fees cut down because we felt the fees were too high. And we worked on it for over 6 weeks, getting the thing, and their attorney kept saying, "Yes, you can do this, and yes, you can do that, yes, you can do this." Well, the hour that we were to vote on accepting or turning down this benefit district regulations, Rancon came in with their attorneys and said, "Nope, you can't do that. Without a public hearing. The original has been changed too much.
Mm.
So it needed to have public hearings again." So we were ready to vote on it right then.
Mm.
And so our attorney sat there and says, "Well, yeah, they're right." I said, "Well, why didn't you tell me this before? Now, you know?"
Mm.
So anyway, we passed it, but it was a big issue with the community, especially those that had commercial property and industrial property. But why Rancon came in and did this, I don't know, because we lowered their fees on their industrial properties.
Mm-hmm.
And we thought that the commercial was too high, so we lowered it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we lowered the part for the housing. But it was a big issue. I was accused of costing Mr. McElroy $1 million personally. And I said, "Well, I haven't cost you anything until you go to build.
Mm-hmm.
So if you haven't built anything, and I doubt if you ever will." And he thought that it was a big negative on his property, which is now being built as a high school.
Okay.
Murrieta's third high school is being built there now.
Oh, okay.
But then we had another one, which was a big deal, was a pool hall. Uptown Billiards wanted to build a pool hall over where home base used to be. And there was a commercial center there, and they wanted to build this Uptown Billiards. Well, the planning department had put, 60-some-odd restrictions on it. It was a conditional use permit anyway. And there was 1,200 people who signed a petition in the neighborhood at that time saying they didn't want a pool hall there. I said, "Well, tell me why." "Well, they're going to be selling drugs. They're going to be serving minors beer in the parking lots." And I said, "Wait a minute. You people have been watching too much television. This is not going to happen. They're conditioned. And if they don't meet these conditions, we can pull their permit and they're out of business. Plus, they're a legal business in a proper zone. And if we deny it, we're liable for a lawsuit." So basically we can't do it. Well, the rest of the council agreed with me and we voted for it. But they were all unhappy. "Why did you do that?" I said, "Look, I explained my reasons why I voted for it. But I took an oath of office here as well to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the state of California, so help me God. They have a constitutional right, if no other, to do this. Besides that, the Constitution doesn't say that I have to agree and vote the way 1,200 people. I have to look after individual rights as well. And so they turned around and walked away. They didn't want to hear that. I didn't care. You know, they said, I don't care if you vote for me anymore or not. So that's the way I was, and I thought one term was enough anyway, with all that was happening.
So you did one term?
The negatives that happened.
So you did just one term on the city council?
Yes, I did one term, and it was a short one because the way it was set up, the ones with the most votes got a full term, the ones that didn't, because you vote every other, or every 2 years, or every 2.5 years, whatever it was. Mm-hmm. Every 2 years, there's somebody up for a re-election.
So tell me your thoughts on how Murrieta has changed.
Oh, God. It's changed. Right. You're talking about from the time we incorporated or from the time that I moved there?
From the time you moved there and then through the incorporation, and just look back and tell me what you see.
Well, what I see is from when I first moved there, we started off with a big bang, with all the housing development coming in. Cal Oaks was the big development at that time. But the first one was what they call North Fork. That one was the first subdivision that was starting to be built. And I moved there wasn't anything but horse ranches. And that all changed. That all went away. There probably isn't more than 3 horses in the whole community now. But that all changed, and then as we kept growing and getting bigger and bigger and bigger, the streets got more jammed up, and the traffic was terrible, and there was it's taken a lot of years to develop Jefferson. Mm-hmm. Washington, I had done a old traffic study going from Temecula back and forth from Temecula to Murrieta, was that Washington needed to be completed. Mm-hmm. Jefferson needed to be completed, and there needed to be another one on the other side of the freeway, the other side of 215 to be completed. And from Hot Springs Road north, another one needed to be completed there. And it's all coming together a little bit at a time now, because Jefferson is basically done all the way to Ivy. Mm-hmm. And Washington is done from Old Town north, but it needed to be done south as well, as far as I was concerned. And then, of course, Monroe is now, they've got another alignment approved there, which wipes out my last piece of property in Murrieta. Mm-hmm. But it was needed, and there was several different studies done on it, and alignment was approved by the county before we were city. But that needed to be taken and taken all the way to Cal Oaks for traffic. And then you've got, of course, now Hancock's in, but it's not totally improved through the hospital area there. But those are some of the areas that I thought that needed to be done early on. But of course, the way government works, they want whoever builds to do that part. It becomes mishmash. It becomes a piece here's, say, 4-lane, and then it comes down to 2-lane, and it's back to 4-lane, and back to 2-lane, which does nothing but create traffic problems. So
yeah, I was wondering why it was like that.
Yeah, well, that's the way they do it. And it's just like the new Monroe alignment. They said, well, we don't have the money to buy the properties, we don't have the money to build the road, but as development goes, the developers will build the road.
Mm.
Well, in my case, they're going to take all of my property, so I'm not going to be able to develop, and they're going to have to improve the road themselves because I'm not going to. I can't build my building on it.
Mm.
So that's some of the things that have taken place that needed to be addressed. Of course, Jefferson should have been built through clear all the way to Flint Key.
Mm-hmm.
And it hasn't been done that I know of anyway, because of course I'm not down there going through everything every day again. But all in all, I think that it's a safe place and a nice place to live. But there's too many people for me. But I enjoyed the horse ranches.
Mm-hmm.
But that's all that was there. Because Sunday morning, I could hear the people riding their bicycles down Washington Street from my place. 5 o'clock in the morning, I could hear them talking. And then there would be 3 cars on downtown, Old Town, on Sunday mornings. There just wasn't any reason to be there.
Mm-hmm.
So, there was no traffic problems. There was there was a little bit of crime, but, people get a car stolen. It took the county 7 days to come around and make a report. And an emergency was 48 hours. I mean, if you had an emergency for a police department, 48 hours was the response time.
Oh.
So that was another reason why I fought hard, and in fact, the newspapers reported, and I have a picture of it, of all of us council people, and it says that law enforcement council elected.
Mm.
So we were all in favor of our own police department.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said before, that 7 cities called me up and asked me how we did it. And I said, well, the reason we could do it was that we had no obligation or under contract to a county. Because if you do, you'll never have enough money to start your own police department and pay them to do the police work too.
Right.
So we were fortunate to start our own because these other cities were unhappy with what they were getting from their counties. One of them was North Hollywood.
Oh.
So,
Anyway, what?
In a nutshell.
Okay, what do you think accounts for the huge boost in population in that area?
It's affordable housing.
Okay.
Which is no longer, as I see it, which should slow things down, but it hasn't. You could buy a house. Well, I built a couple of houses in Wildemar when I was down there early on in '85. I built a couple of houses, and everybody told me, you got to keep it under 100,000 or you'll never sell them. Well, I sold one for 95,000, or I sold the other one for 108,000. So it was still affordable at that. So local people bought those. I didn't have people from outside. But when the first subdivision came in and people, they widened the 15, added another lane to both sides of the 15. It opened that area up to where they could still commute back to Orange County and Los Angeles County and Riverside and San Diego. And the housing was affordable then. To buy a house for 120,000, 150,000 in those days was really affordable, and they could qualify to buy them. So they were willing to pay the extra in gasoline and what have you to drive, and the extra time. In fact, my wife actually drove to Huntington Beach every day to teach. She taught at Golden West College, and she would drive. Not that she liked living in Murrieta. She liked where we lived before, but she did it. And she told people that she did it because she did what she wanted to do. And so she was the only one that commuted. There was a lot of them that commuted. Clear to Los Angeles, in fact.
That's a long drive.
To live there.
So do you think that the developments, the new housing, the influx of people happened too fast for the city to keep up with in any way?
Well, I don't think so now because of their financial situation. I know that the city of Murrieta, they claim in poverty, but I know that they have quite a bit of money that they can handle the situation. And they're starting to build some of the roads and the overpasses and what have you to try to handle some of the traffic. But there's the overpass at Ivy is going to have for Los Alamos, whichever it is at that point, that has to be improved and widened to handle the traffic for that high school. Because the traffic just jams up, and that original high school was in the wrong location as far as I was concerned, because all the kids were over on the other side of the freeways. So they had to truck them all over there, and they had to either take them or put them on a bus, and the traffic was horrendous from all directions, because the parents were driving their cars over there to take their kids to school. So I said, build the school where the kids are so that they could even walk to school if they had to.
What a novel idea.
And that's an obligation that they're not willing to do a lot of times. But, I walked to school. I figured they could.
We all walk to school, but no more.
Well, I walked to school in the snow, and it was uphill both directions.
Yeah, that's what I used to tell my kids, too.
Yeah.
And there was always 10 feet of snow you had to trudge through.
Oh, yes. Well, I was born in Kansas, so it wasn't all just talk.
But Kansas is flat.
Kansas is flat, but the town I lived in had a hill, and the high school and the junior high was on a hill.
Okay.
Had to walk uphill, but it was downhill going home. But it was about 3 miles.
That's a good distance.
Yes. Especially for an 8th grader.
Yeah. Especially in the winter.
Yeah. 3 feet of snow. Sometimes 4.
Oh. So, is there anything I haven't asked you about that you'd like to include in the interview?
Well, not much. The one thing that I was happy to see was that the city finally acquired a town hall. They got that away from Vermont so that it could be used by the people that were intended for it to be used. But I would love to be around long enough to see them open the time capsule that we buried at the fire station.
Tell me about that.
Well, we buried a time capsule. We put in different things that we had and that pertained to the incorporation and cityhood, some newspaper articles and what have you. And we buried it there at the fire station number 1, out by the flagpole.
Oh, okay.
So it was a 25-year capsule.
Okay.
And so, I don't know, what is it, 14, 15 years now? Well, if I'm around in 10 years, I'd like to see it uncovered.
You can go back and be there for a ceremony.
Well, yeah, because I had an old top hat on, and I looked like Digger Odell, and I covered the capsule up with a shovel. So I had a picture of it someplace, but I don't know where it is now. But anyway, we buried that capsule there.
Oh, okay. Well, if there's nothing else, I just want to thank you very much for talking to me. This has been really informative.
Well, you're welcome.
Okay, hold on just a second.